Good afternoon, Bullfrog Army. I am now in number 9 of the top 10 horror. I'm sorry, horror. I just posted my top 20 horror film list, and now I am doing number 9 on war films, which is The Young Lions. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about why The Young Lions is number 9. I guess it depends on whether or not you've seen the movie or not. Because this is one that, because of the way that film works now, most people kind of stick into the wheelhouse of modern cinema. This was not the case when I was younger, at least in my teenhoods. We watched a lot of movies from the past, including and up to about the early 1940s. Those were still considered to be very good movies. Now, for the youth, kind of now, they don't watch those types of films as much anymore because the film genre has changed so much. And that's due to the 80s film school generation who decided to put asses in the seats as opposed to making what I would call solid stories. Does that make sense? I want to show you the difference now between what is considered a solid story and what is putting asses in the seats, okay? And I'll give you a great example. This is the difference between Jaws and Psycho, okay? So let's look at this. Okay, Jaws is considered to be a horror masterpiece, okay, by most people, okay? And then you have Psycho over here, okay? Now, what I can tell you is Jaws is not so much a horror masterpiece. It's not shot very well. There's no technical elements. I mean, true, they kind of came up with what was called the Jaws close-up, which was to bring the camera in while you were zooming out. So you had this weird kind of, like, everyone's seen it. It's been in 10,000 movies now. Which is it's an okay concept. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that there were since the 80s there were only 2 real camera styles that were invented that were worth a hot piss. And one of them happens to be in The Reverend. I'm not sure if it came before that or not. And then there's one that was invented by the filmmaker in Pi, which was, and they're too technical. I don't want to get into them. But those are kind of like the 2 cameras that were invented that were worth anything. The Jaws close-up is definitely a good one, but that doesn't even make the top 50 of camera techniques, I don't think. But it is definitely one that is used a lot, and that's what I'm going to explain, because people like it a lot. Okay, does that make sense? Like the ones that are technical that add mastery are not ones that necessarily people like, and this is where we're going to get into a huge debate. Because this is where I really draw the line in the sand here, and the difference between putting asses in a seat and technical mastery. They are not the two of the same things, and very, very often they do not fall together. There are very few films that are technical masterpieces that people like, and there are very few films that put asses in the seats that technical masters like at all. Okay, Jaws I definitely like. Don't get me wrong; it's a good movie. It's a good, solid movie. But can you really say, and I mean this literally, can you really say it's much better than most horror films that you have seen? Right? It's not, because you have to have artistry to make a good film, but you also want it to be popular, because being popular is getting money and to be able to support your projects. So there is a fine balance between the two that an artist must kind of deal with in order. Does he want it to be popular now, or does he want it to be, or she, whatever, be like a very influential film? Okay, because Psycho is far more influential than Jaws. We have seen Jaws now 7,000 times in different ways. If you want to talk about what Spielberg's contribution was, that's completely different, because his was kind of the duel-esque aspect of his real technical contribution, just like Lucas had another one, which I would go into in another time. But Lucas had sort of a different take, which was cinema verite in a science fiction film, which was very, very good. That's a movie called THX 1138. Nobody has seen it because nobody likes it, but it's a very, very good film. And Spielberg's major contribution, there was actually several, because he was a very, very good director. But I'm trying to think. For his, it's the suspense element of The Duel, which was it's a movie. It's about a man that drives. I don't know. He's somewhere in the Southwest, and he's chased by a truck, and it doesn't explain why. That kind of suspense terror is something that he invented, which is it's a fantastic job. I mean, that is The Duel is a great film, and it is, I believe, right at the very end of the top 100 of films of all time. It may be 97, 98. I haven't got that far in my. I think I'm at about 60 now in my list. It's pretty hard because you're talking about all films of all time, so it does get very hard. And if it's not in the top 100, it is in the top 120 films of all time, because that is a very, 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 very good idea. To have malice with no particular reason. Okay, that's a very terrorizing aspect, and I like that about him. But regardless, we're talking about the Young Lions, and the reason I brought that all up, just to cement it and bring it back, is that the Young Lions is about a time period in Hollywood that does not exist anymore. Okay, which is good acting and great story. Okay, these are not stories that are flying across a galaxy fighting bad guys. These are not. That has nothing to do with these type of stories. These type of stories are about individuals and their response to society. Okay, and those are films that are really not done anymore. There are still people that do them. It's just that people don't talk about them near as much as they talk about Marvel movies and things like that, because the film school generation really has taken over. Since the 80s now, the major goal of studios is to put asses in the seats. And that is much to the behest of good classic storytelling. Okay, because you can make a film for $30 million and make $90 million if it's good. Okay, or you can make a film for $200 million and make $1 billion. And that's really what they look at now, and that makes sense. I completely agree with them. If that's what you want to do, if you just want to make money, then that's the best way to do it. Okay, and that's just it. You know, there are still studios that don't. Warner Brothers is still very much a salty studio. You know, there are still always production companies that are coming up that are trying to make salty films, but most of the studios now have gone to almost complete just making huge films for huge audiences. Okay, it's just not, and I'm talking about major studios. I am not in any way talking about minor studios. Okay, they just do. But these types of films, like this is a Fox film, okay, and it was very controversial for the time. Marlon Brando plays a Nazi officer, okay, and they want you to sympathize with him up until the point that he dies, tragically, of course, because he was a Nazi officer. That's part of the story. Is if you're going to be a bad person, you have to pay the for the crime. He doesn't realize what was really going on in the war, but he thinks that Hitler had some notions that were worth following, and he wanted the betterment of Germany. Okay, and then you have Montgomery Clift and Dean Martin. Now, Dean Martin didn't do a particularly good job in this film, I don't think, but Montgomery Clift really did. But it's not really the acting, other than Brando's, that I want to talk about here. It is really the story. Okay, the story is that you know, this is about World War II, obviously, because he's a Nazi officer, but it's about much more than that. This is about kind of human nature and the shittiness of human nature, so to speak. Because Brando is a poor man in Germany, and he doesn't have the ability to be able to rise above his station. Okay, and because of that, he joins that army with the hope that he will be able to rise above that station, and then he's ultimately disillusioned when he finally figures out what they're really doing, which is killing Jews. You know, I mean, that was really the point. I mean, it wasn't the point of the German army, it was to conquer the world, which is a crazy concept. No one has ever been able to do that. It shows how insane their leaders really were. Yeah, not to, I mean, just to be completely frank, you never, I mean, that's Sun Tzu's Art of War. That's one of the first tenets of Art of War, or a law of power. Never take more land than you can hold. Okay, saying that you're going to conquer the world is as insane as saying that you're God or something like that. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not possible. You would never be able to hold it with any type of sustainable. The most, you know, not to talk about historical elements, but Rome was the most the probably the biggest landowner of all time. Okay, and ultimately that's what caused their demise. We can talk about all kinds of different issues about the fall of the Roman Empire, the bringing in Christianity, blah blah blah. But that's really not what ultimately caused it, as much as they just held too much and they wanted too much. Okay, so that is just a rule. You can only hold what you can only hold, and that's it. And then on top of that, also the German army was slaughtering innocent people, truly innocent people that had did nothing. So that's a sickening part of history, and it's an important part to remember because we don't want that to happen again. Okay, it just is not. It's not possible to understand how awful that really is, unless you've watched documentaries on the Holocaust. Okay, and I highly recommend it. And if you want if you want links for good documentaries, I'd be more than happy to provide them for you, because there are some very, very good documentaries, okay? And even Spielberg made, I would argue, the greatest Holocaust film of all time, which was Schindler's List, okay? It is a very, very important film to watch. It is not an easy film to watch. It is not a fun film to watch, okay? But it is an important goddamn film, and you need to watch it, okay? Because this is how mad society can get sometimes, okay? And if you think it can't happen in any place, just open a history book on any page and I'll show you where it can. You need to be diligent and you need to be strong about your personal beliefs and understand that there is no one that is really worse than you that you need to kill that has done nothing wrong. Okay? That's just it. Okay? Anyway, I just want to clarify that because we're talking about a controversial film, because it was Brando as a Nazi officer. Okay, so I just want to clear up that is absolutely something that should be viewed critically. Okay, and Brando understood that too. Okay, and that's again why he dies, because again he's disillusioned because he finally figures out that the Holocaust was happening, and he knew that it was just some sick, twisted thing by a sick, twisted individual. That is what happened there, and it really shows the totality of war. Because Dean Martin didn't even want to fight; he didn't want to be drafted, but he was. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a couple of years since I've seen the film, but I believe he hangs out with Montgomery Clift, and they develop a friendship. And Montgomery Clift has always been kind of a James Dean-esque kind of. I'm trying to think of what that is. It's a particular style of acting, method acting. Excuse me. It's really the only acting that's used anymore, really. There are exceptions to that, of course, but not really. Of course, Brando was a method actor, too. So this was really one of the first films that talked about method, that really used method acting in an important way. Okay, and that was to talk about very controversial things that were going on. Okay? And again, I just want to stress this, is that this is a film that is worth watching. If you like good story and great acting, this is the film to watch, okay? The reason I don't recommend a lot of films before method acting takes place is because they seem hokey by today's standards. They're certainly not. They were based in theatrics, which is to give rise of emotion and to be able to enunciate and produce sound that is worthy of hearing, okay? Method acting is completely different. It falls into a realism category. In fact, now we are in what I would call a real turn of the page, which is ultra-realism. Okay, The Joker is one of the first films I have seen that is in what I would consider to be ultra-realism, okay? So we're into a different style completely now of acting. Well, it's not necessarily. It comes from method acting, and it comes from the camera to begin with anyway. Because when the camera's there, it's different than being in a theater. In a theater, you have to produce sound, and your movements have to be much more dramatic. Because I mean, if I'm this far back and you can't see me, if I'm moving my hands around, you can see me better. Okay, but and now we have it up here, so you have a lot of close-ups, and it's like, we want to see what it is that you feel and how you think. And it's a lot harder because you don't want to really, as a general rule, although I disagree with some major screenwriter critiques on it, I still think you can use voiceover for thought. I still think it's an appropriate thing to use because you don't have to show everything. It's too hard. Okay, and books do it, so why not? You have the capabilities and the technology of it. So that is something that I believe Some screenwriters definitely think is that you can use voiceover for thoughts, and I think that that's very important. You can even really use voiceover for anything. It's just that I wouldn't overuse it because then you're completely telling the story. And there's no point in somebody watching it visually if you're just telling the story. And that's about it. Okay, so we kind of covered The Young Lions. Go ahead and watch it. I'm sure you can get it on many different places. It's a very good film, and it's number 9 in the top 10 war films of all time. Until then, my Bullfrog Army, Vita Zen.